All right, we are live, and I'm excited for this broadcast because I have with me a special guest. Today, I'm joined by Charlie Stickney, who is the co-creator of White Ash. He's back on Kickstarter this month with the first White Ash spin-off series, GLARIEN. And if you don't know Charlie, you should. He's a writer, producer from Los Angeles. He spent the last 20 years or so creating film, television, animation, and music video projects for companies like Sony Pictures, Universal Pictures, Revolution Studios, Scholastic Productions. He broke into the comic scene in a big way in 2017 with the debut of his wildly popular Kickstarter-funded series White Ash, co-created with artist Connor Hughes. And he's later published in the direct market by Scout Comics, where he serves as co-publisher. Charlie, you're currently running the 8th successful Kickstarter campaign, I believe, for GLARIEN the White Ash. It's a fantasy series for mature readers, off to a phenomenal start. So welcome back to Comics Launch, my friend. How are you doing?
I can't complain. I mean, I think that question is always couched in, the world we're living in. Yeah. But aside from that, I think things are going pretty good. I couldn't be happier with how the Kickstarter is going and, just comics in general. I mean, look at that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is the 2020/2021 response where, there's a million things we could all complain about, but we all also know it's like, there's always people out there that have it so much worse than
for sure.
Us. At least for creators that have been launching on Kickstarter, this has actually been a great stretch, a phenomenal run. I think you've probably had your two of your most successful Kickstarter campaigns during this time. You're back on Kickstarter right now with GLARIEN, and so I'm excited because we're going to have a high-level, freewheeling discussion about all things Kickstarter in 2021, and especially I think we'll focus on this concept of spin-offs, expanded universes, and just how we are evolving our crowdfunding going forward, and so I'm really excited to pick your brain on this stuff and to hear what you're thinking about. But for those who are completely new to the Stickney-verse, what is this latest project, GLARIEN, and what is White Ash? Give us the sort of high level for these. So we can set the frame for what we'll be talking about for the rest of the discussion.
Sure. So White Ash, quickly, it's grounded fantasy set in the real world. I always think that when you're doing big, high concept fantasy, it's good to give people an endpoint, right? Something that they can relate to. So White Ash is set in a coal mining town in Pennsylvania. And the pitch I came up with originally was Romeo and Juliet meets Lord of the Rings in rural Pennsylvania. But what it's really about is about a young guy who, and I'm going to go into spoilers real quick because we've now been out for about 3 or 4 years. It's about a guy who's he's going off to college. He's a coal miner. Comes from a family of coal miners, but he quickly finds out that he comes from a family of dwarves, and that this young woman that he's fallen in love with comes from a family of elves. So there's this forbidden romance aspect. But it's about someone really, at its core, discovering that there's so much more to life than he ever thought, and how the legacy of who you are kind of shapes, who you will be going forward. And so I've been really fortunate. We started off, with our first Kickstarter campaign, which only, we had about 327 backers. And from that, through the platform of Kickstarter, I've been able to continue to build my audience. And that's given me a lot of latitude in terms of, planning what I'm doing going forward in terms of expanding the universe. And I think, when we talk about success on Kickstarter, this is a huge campaign. We're trending to probably over 1,000 backers. I don't know what the final dollar total is going to be, but it's going to be high. But it's not an overnight thing. It's something that I've built up over years, building an audience, cultivating an audience, delivering, giving them books that people really like, building a fan base. And through that, I'm able to take some risks. So, where White Ash, I like to say, is a PG-13 story about this young couple, Alec and Lillian, who have found each other. It's a PG-13 version. GLARIEN, but they have to deal with these R-rated characters that are constantly getting into their universe. GLARIEN is an R-rated character who deals with some R-rated subjects. I have, but at its core, you see a lot of books on Kickstarter that you think are sex books. This is not that. This is sort of a complex story. We're telling the story of GLARIEN, who is actually Lillian's mother, an elf from 3,000 years ago, but we're telling that story through the eyes of a young woman named Rachel in 1970s New York, who's having flashbacks of being GLARIEN. And it's really, this story at its core, it's about two women from two different time periods who are dealing with trauma that's happened to them and how that, that impacts them going forward, how they deal with that trauma. But then ultimately, over the course of the miniseries, we'll see how these two women are connected to each other from two different times and two different worlds.
Yeah, and so there's a lot to unpack there, and I think I have some questions about thought process and things going into that. But one of the things that we had a discussion recently within my community, just talking about the project we love tag and what will get it to you and what might not get it to you. This was obviously a project that Kickstarter loves, and it's also a project that you're making nothing quiet about the mature reader aspect of it. As you can see, you've got some censored images in your preview pages, but you're not hiding what this book is. But the way it's being told, it's presented from the art style, from the approach, sets it apart, I think, from purely exploitive.
Well, I mean, like that was really important to me going into it. I thought, fantasy often calls for some of that. I mean, you look at Game of Thrones,
Right.
You go into some more adult territory with it occasionally. And I had some themes I wanted to explore with this book, which were a little bit different than I had before, which were intrinsic to the character of GLARIEN. However, I thought to myself, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it the right way. So I wanted to work with a female artist to make sure that how where the camera was being placed, I think in some ways, it's not as male gazy, and right. and so that was important to me. I'm also working with Melissa White, who's my editor / sensitivity reader, who's working with to make sure, again, the subject matter is being handled in a way that is appropriate, and we're not trying to be, we're not trying to use those themes to push the book. Those themes are intrinsic to the story that we're trying to tell, and you can't tell the same story with trying to curtail some of those things.
Yeah.
So like I said, but that all said, when I first submitted my project to Kickstarter, it was rejected. Which was the first time I had ever had that happen to me, where I got back kind of the blank form and it said, like Kickstarter doesn't do pornography. Which, if we scroll through some of the Kickstarter projects, I mean, I think some people would disagree with that.
Right.
But like it was one of those things where I hadn't completed the project page yet. I hadn't put the censor bars on things that were going to be censored for the project page. So someone probably just flagged it for some of those things. But I reached out to Ariana, who's the Kickstarter outreach, and I had a conversation with her, and she went and looked at it because she hadn't looked at the project. And I think if you look at the history of a project, if you actually read what's there, you'll see that this is not an exploitive book. It's, again, a book that's dealing with mature themes that happen to be intrinsic to the storyline. So so it went from being rejected by a Kickstarter to being pre-flagged as a project you love before it came out. So I think with a lot of these things is you can explore any theme, you just need to do it appropriately. And you can do the good version of that's not trying to be exploitive, not trying to make money off it. I think also, for me, one of the flags of what makes a mature project, a mature book that's just trying to make money is what kind of covers you're doing. Yeah. And if it's the naked covers, if it's the, hey, here's a naked cover, so for me, my covers for the most part are all done by women. I think when you're trying to frame things, your cover sets the tone, sets the theme. Like we may have some mature things on the inside, but for the most part, our covers, the covers are tasteful. The covers are showcasing different aspects of the world of GLARIEN as the warrior. The duality of the two different worlds and how they coincide. So I think, again, it's about how you approach any particular subject. You can do it the right way, or you can do it the way, that doesn't work for me. It's like that there's like certain types of stories I wouldn't tell. Now I do think that there are people who will back a campaign because they see the mature readers label.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there are also people who won't back a campaign because of that. And, for me, I have a pretty big fan base with White Ash, and the last thing I would want to do is alienate that fan base. So I wanted them to know that anything that we were doing would feel like it was part of the White Ash universe, and we weren't, stretching beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I'll probably have more questions about that, but I'm curious, you've been working on White Ash. It's been sort of, the world's known about it since 2017. Obviously, we all know how much work goes into starting a series. So this is probably a story that's been in your head for a lot longer than that. But I'm curious, when did you realize or know that GLARIEN needed / deserved / had to have a spinoff series?
Well, so I have with White Ash, I have a huge backstory going that dates back about 3,000 years already. And a lot of that featured GLARIEN. And when I was doing White Ash, my first thought was, like, in White Ash 3 that was on Kickstarter, it opens with a flashback set in 1918, which was the first introduction of GLARIEN. And so the thought at the time was that I was just going to do more of that, kind of the way when you think about Lost, would sometimes flashback to things that happened before the island, ways to, just to flesh out the universe, and give you some of the backstory. But the response to the character that people started asking me about with that issue, because it was such this intriguing snapshot of who she was. And, Connor, who's the artist on it, he often gets requests for when it's one of the tiers that we often do are like sketch covers, or we do, original art. And he started getting all these GLARIEN requests. And I knew that, like, that character, even though she'd only been in a 4-page segment so far, was starting to resonate with people. So when I did my hardcover, I did another GLARIEN short story that was set back in time. It would give you it was just from like the 1800s, and people loved that. So I could see that there was definitely some appetite for it. And then, so I think that put the seed in my head. And then, as you know, the logistics of making comics is you're often waiting for art to come in, right? Because the process of drawing takes so much longer than the process of writing. And I knew I had this huge White Ash story that I wanted to tell, and I have an audience that supports it. So I started thinking about ways I could start getting them more of that story, more of that content. And I thought, if I can find the right artist to do a GLARIEN spinoff, then I can tell another piece of this story, and I can have multiple Kickstarters running in the same year, right? So do a White Ash Kickstarter, then a GLARIEN Kickstarter. And I'm not tying up Connor, who's drawing White Ash, to try to also draw the GLARIEN spinoff. And so, like, that was the next stage in the thought process. And then I started thinking, okay, if this works, do I have other plans for other pieces of the story I want to tell the same way? So, like, right now, tentatively, after this GLARIEN miniseries ends, I have another spinoff that I might want to try. It's just ways of expanding the universe, getting other artists in, being able to run multiple Kickstarters in the same year. And again, not tie up your audience. Not tie up your artist, so you can keep, building the world.
Yeah, that's definitely a great way to go about it. Reminds me of what Rob Moltari is doing right now. He's been serializing his series Nightwolf. Sure. Introduced a female character in that, Snowpaw, who's now he wants to get that rolling as a miniseries, and so he's got a Kickstarter for that coming up. And so let's talk about this idea of the expanded universe. For me personally, my very first Kickstarter campaign was actually a spinoff. It was a spinoff of a character who, much like what Connor experienced when I was doing conventions or stuff, it was a character, Oxymoron, from my series, right. The Red 10, who was kind of a side character, very little real estate on screen, and yet 70% of the commission requests or sketch covers with that character drawn on it just couldn't keep them on the table. And so that was like sign to me that, all right, hey, if we're gonna spin this off, let's play with this character. Like, what would you say the advantages of running a spin-off series are, like, to building upon an existing world that you've already created? And then on the flip side, what are some of the challenges of spinning off for a creator like yourself that has a ton of ideas?
Well, I think, if we start with the challenges, you have to, I think you always have to be careful on Kickstarter or really with anything, that you don't want to exhaust your audience and you don't want to overestimate your audience. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see creators sometimes make is they put their asks too high, with a follow-up project. And because they're like, oh, if I raise $6,000 now, I can raise $10,000 next time, and then I can raise $15,000 next time.
Right, as if you are the key, you are the one key ingredient that makes the difference, and nothing else is at play. I've seen a lot of creators get down on themselves because they feel like, oh, I've lost my fan base, when in reality you launched a completely different project that, hey, this might be a little bit more niche.
Right. So like I did, so I have this other series called The Game, which is a sci-fi universe, and we've done one issue. We're going to be doing another issue soon for that. But it doesn't have 35. We just hit the next mark. Amazing. Woo. But it did. I thought when I launched it, I wasn't going to have the same reaction that White Ash had, because we had done three different Kickstarters for White Ash. I didn't think, now launching The Game, I would get the same, I would get some of the fans that would go over, but I wouldn't get all of them. So that was sort of my thought process here with GLARIEN. Like, the last White Ash campaign that I did before this one was hugely successful. We grossed about $33,000, which again, blows me away. And we had 1,000 people that backed it. That said, I went into this hoping, on the low end, I thought, my floor is going to be about 500 backers, because I think at least half of the people from White Ash will come over. And I hope I can hit $15,000. I'm not going to, expand my expectations based on my last White Ash Kickstarter and think that a White Ash spinoff will do better as well. So I wasn't, setting a goal of $20,000. And I think this is another thing that Kickstarter creators need to keep in mind, is you want to hit that goal sooner than later. Because, if people don't think you have a chance of getting that goal, I heard Jason Inneman, who was on your show, say this the other day. I really do think people do that mental calculation. If they don't think you're going to reach the goal, they're not going to back your Kickstarter. So even if I thought I had a good shot of getting 20 or 25,000 on this Kickstarter, I wasn't going to put up a budget, an ask of $20,000 for a new property. So I think you need to be really careful when you're playing with what you think you can raise and engaging those expectations, especially from a spinoff. So I was trying to be really, 10,000 is still a pretty big ask for a single issue series. If I didn't have the fan base that I had, I wouldn't have been doing that. But I felt pretty confident that out of the gate, I was going to hit $10,000 to $15,000. I felt like that was the floor. And again, I'm very lucky. I don't want to come across as someone who feels that, I'm owed that kind of money, or that my campaigns will always do that. I just thought, running the numbers on this particular campaign, that's what they would do as a floor. So I think that's a big thing that you have to be careful of when you're doing a spinoff. You have to gauge the interest for that character, for that world. You have to think of your own personal time, because if you're developing this, are you taking time away from your other baby? It's if we have kids, you're always sort of balancing your time. How much attention am I giving this child? How much of my attention am I giving this child? But if you do it correctly, what you're doing is you're giving attention to one child that's going to help the other. So what I'm looking to do with this campaign was to bring in new White Ash fans that would hopefully funnel back to the next White Ash campaign. So if it feels like it's set in the same universe, if it feels like it's an extension of the story that you're already telling, hopefully you're going to bring in some new people, but you're not going to lose too many of the old people.
Absolutely. And, anecdotally, and I'm sure you haven't, with 800 and closing in on 850 backers, it's weird. It's like there are some campaigns or some days when, you can pay attention to every single person that backs. When you're in the hundreds, it's easy to lose track of who actually is backing you. But do you have a sense that you are bringing in new readers, like discovering people that are discovering this world from the first time, either through comments or just with the different angle or the different hook?
So I think when you come to Kickstarter, you always have to bring what you have personally as an advantage. David Avallone, who I don't know if you know, but he's a writer and he's done a couple of books on Kickstarter with Kevin Eastman, right? And I've been in Kickstarter panels with him where he's like, hey, what's my advice? Have Kevin Eastman as your partner in a Kickstarter. Because that's the big asset that he has. So one thing that I have an advantage of now is that Scout, is putting out White Ash. And we did a GLARIEN one-shot that I timed to come out a couple of weeks before the Kickstarter campaign. My hope was going to be that what I could do is then have people who had discovered GLARIEN as a one-shot in the stores come to the Kickstarter platform. And in turn, the Kickstarter platform would either push them back to discover some of the Scout issues of White Ash or my Kickstarter issues of White Ash.
So that was a different than what's being funded, than what's being crowd offered here. That was a one shot, and this is the start of the miniseries. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So the one shot was 3 digital stories that had been offered in previous Kickstarter campaigns that had not been offered in print before. Okay. There were some stretch goals where people got digital stories. I then had Scout Comics print them, and I told the backers, hey, if you want to go get those, you can get those at the comic book shops. And if you back things on Kickstarter, it's nice to be able occasionally to get a comic for $3.99, which is not the Kickstarter prices. So that was my way of giving back to them. They got the digital stretch goals as free, but if they wanted a print copy, they could pick it up through Scout. But we had that come out a couple of weeks before this. So I've had a couple of comments from people who said, hey, I found you through the Scout one shot. I'd love to know more about the White Ash universe. So I do know there, at least anecdotally, have been a couple of people. I'm assuming there's been more because the start to we've already in a week passed the highest dollar total I've ever raised before.
Right.
In 3 days, it was my second biggest campaign. So it's been a big success. I can't quantify all the factors that led to it, but obviously that helped.
Now, one of the things that to what extent have you adjusted pricing a little bit lately? I noticed. So you've got, an $8 digital, which includes the new PDF plus some of the other things, and name in the backers section of the PDF, which is cool. And then $20 plus shipping for your individual issues. Now, how are you, talk to me about your pricing. I would say this pricing is a little bit on the high side of where single issues are. I know you will still hear creators that, will, and usually it's creators. It's rarely do I hear fans say, I will never pay, such and such. Occasionally you do, but I'm curious, what's your current thinking on pricing? And then also, do you attribute some of that to the performance of this campaign?
So I my pricing hasn't changed too much in my last campaign or two. Mm-hmm. The thing to remember is this is a 40-page comic, right? Yep. This is not a 22-page comic. And already with the other PDFs, they're getting another 20-page comic. So basically it's 60 pages worth of content that any backer coming to the campaign is getting. Yeah. I think, and if you look at I've spent a lot of time now in the direct market working with Scout, and when things, when you look at the web store variants, when you look at the variant covers that you see at a lot of places, you're looking at $10, $15, $20 from regular companies for limited edition variant covers.
Absolutely.
So like if you look at that as your base pricing, like the $15 for a variant versus a $3.99 book, and at this point, actually, a lot of comic book companies are moving up to $4.99 or $6.99 for their comics anyway. $20 for a comic isn't that high compared to $15. And I look at these versions as a limited edition variant. These are artisan comics. I'm probably going to have a print run of each cover of anywhere from, maybe a little bit higher for the main cover, but for all the variant covers, those are going to be 350 or less. My variant covers also come with a limited edition coin, the collector's coin as well. So, that becomes a better deal. And then you're getting the shorts. We've just reached a stretch goal where we're adding another short. So now there's 30 pages of digital comics added to that. And who knows, if we go high enough, we might tack on another. So, it may be a little higher than some campaigns, but we deliver a lot more. And I also do early bird specials. So anyone who backed in the first 2 days of the campaign, we're getting those $20 books, I think, at $18. We had deals for a pick two, which was 2 covers for $35. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, that's a lot cheaper. So, and then like my bundles where you're getting 5 covers, there was an early bird pricing at $80 for that. So when I'm doing reward tiers, I try to incentivize people to move up for the collectors, but also give people some cheaper things to be able to hang their hats on, and the early bird specials to reward the backers who are coming back. So I think that's sort of my philosophy on the tiers. But I think everyone has a different price point. You want to offer them things at those price points. If I look at like you look at something like Sad Psycho Girl, which is like the Dan Mendoza project that's on Kickstarter right now. I think he's raised close to $70,000 on that project right now. Yeah. And he has 300 or 400 backers less than I do. So, his average per pledge. And the same thing when you look at something like Lady Death, like that's over 300K right now. Yeah. So it's doing 10 times the business that my campaign is doing. However, they only have 4 times the number of backers. So, there's a whole range in terms of what people will pay. And I don't want to go to that point where I feel like I am, ripping people off. But I think in terms of the price for the market, if you look at what companies are charging for variant covers, and this really is, this is like, at the end of the day, when I'm doing this, I'm not a publisher. I am Charlie Stickney self-publishing these books, and I have my own overhead and costs. And just like you buy artisan beer, these are artisan comics. These are from the creator. And so for me, I think you need to figure all that into your pricing and not feel guilty about charging rates that you think are what the book deserves. And I do think, like anything that's on Kickstarter is a limited edition that, is equivalent to those $15 to $20 web store variants that are exclusive. So.
Yeah, I definitely think you've got the right attitude and approach there. And also just the idea that I think we also have to just debunk a little bit is that necessarily charging cheap or very low cost is going to, significantly increase the likelihood that people are going to back. In a lot of cases, the decision is not, well, do I get this if the digital or print price is perfect or not? It's do I want this or not? And if I do, the range of acceptable pricing for most creators is probably a lot bigger than, or most people out there, backers out there. Creators can be persnickety and cheap because we all have our own projects that we're trying to fund, right? So pricing to make other creators happy is never something that I recommend people do because other creators want to pay next to nothing.
Well, and I think the one thing that I've changed in this campaign, because it's my highest per pledge average for a campaign, is I do think that you have to look at how Kickstarter changes. and how I've laid out my page now versus how I laid out the first White Ash page has changed.
Well, talk me through that. Talk me through some of the decisions that you made and what you see as most important and how you're conveying this. Yeah.
Sure. So I think like if you know, when I first came to Kickstarter, I looked at a lot of other successful campaigns, and I think people need to do their research. If they're coming to it, you need to find campaigns that work, not just one. Look at a couple, you know, don't just ape one person. Look at what the elements that are working from a lot of different people. But for a while, there was a standard format on Kickstarter, and you know, you'd have your introduction, you'd have your video, you'd have, you know, your pictures of your campaign, you'd have your 6-page preview, and then you would go into possibly rewards, and then everyone did the brackets where they broke down, you know, if you pledge at this, here's a picture of everything you get in that package. Yeah. And I did a lot of that, but you know, I've moved away from that now because I think people are Kickstarter savvy. They don't need to be talked through that as much. Like if you pledge this package, you get this bundle. If you pledge this package, that you get this bundle. And so I try to give more visual space to the actual covers, the rewards. So they're, you know, so when you scroll through my page, you see this is the cover you're getting, and you get a good shot of it. You can take a look at it. You get this reward. Because then if you see the rewards, you see what they are, then you can go back to the reward tiers and choose the bundle that works for you. And I see this in a lot of Kickstarter pages, is people shrink everything down, and you can't really get a good look at the impact of a cover. And I don't think people need as much hand-holding as they used to in terms of what a bundle entails. So like that's been a change for me. And then the other change is basically because I've been dabbling in the retail market, I see how the variant cover game has become such an important part of that, especially for launching a series. So my last campaign with White Ash, I had 3 covers. This one, I have 4 covers. And, you know, even—
Is that, you know, 4 covers total or 4 variant covers?
I think—
Or do you consider them all variants because it's
I think it's just scroll through for a second. Let me see. I'm 1, 2, 3, 4. So 5 total.
Yeah,
I've got 5 total
the one
covers.
at the top here.
Yeah. So there's 5 covers, and that gives me a bundle that people can choose all 5 covers. And then all of a sudden, that's an $80 tier for the early birds. It's a $90 tier for anyone who finds the campaign after the first couple of days. And if you get, you know, 20 people backing at that pledge tier, it helps up your overall average. And give the collectors what they want. And then the other thing I did differently in this was I had a pick 2. So you could pick 2 covers. So you didn't have to take the regular cover or the variant. You could also just pick your 2 favorites out of those 5. And so I had a lot of people who did that on the early bird pricing because it's a deal compared to the other tiers. So I think thinking about, you know, what you want to push people towards. And like for me, I was hoping, you know, in my mind, I always have like the ideal tier. Yeah, it's like you want people to be, because I think, where do you maximize revenue? Where do you maximize the least amount of work that you have to do to deliver something? I mean, I want to deliver quality across the board. And I think going back to that conversation about pricing, you know, you look at Apple, you know, for the good and the bad that Apple has done, you know, one of the reasons why they were able to charge more for their products is the presentation. It's the packaging. And when you open up, you feel like you're opening something expensive, right? It's an experience. You feel like you're getting something that's high end. So with my Kickstarters, I also always want to deliver something that's high end. People are not just getting just the comic. It often comes with other things. It comes with, you know, banners. It comes with prints. But I always print those on nice high end paper. So when you open my packages, like you can even see this box. Like this is a custom made box that I had with the White Ash on the inside. So when people are opening, you know, that box, they feel like it's something that's a little bit more special. It's not an envelope that something was shoddily stuck in. So when you get it, you feel, oh, you know what, this was worth the money. And I think that's also a key, is you want to make people feel like they got more than they paid for when they open the package.
Absolutely. And that's the last big moment of a Kickstarter campaign. You want to go out on a high note when they actually open it up. I just had 3 Kickstarters rewards delivered yesterday, so it was a little Christmas morning experience for me opening them up. But I think this is definitely great, and I want to just point some quick Kickstarter page tips that Charlie just mentioned that I want to put a pin on, because I still see a lot of pages that don't even think about doing this, is talking about delivery and talking about how your books will be packaged and ensured that they're going to arrive in a great condition. That shows the reader that you've done your homework, that you're thinking from their perspective, and it easily addresses a common objection to backing it all, is that, is this going to be another book that arrives dented and banged up? Well, here's the steps that we've thought about that. And then the other thing that you called out that I think is very important is, if you're going to go through the trouble of getting really solid, really beautiful, well done variant covers or covers to your books at all, you want to make sure that you give them the space and the on your page to really stand out, so that people can get a good look at them. And you've definitely done that with the covers for GLARIEN. So in terms of, I know you said that you had your pre-launch page up and running for this one, and you were able to get that moving. How did you incorporate the pre-launch page into your overall sort of pre-promotion kickoff strategy?
So, I mean, this has been a fairly new feature that Kickstarter's had.
Yeah.
And I think in general, when you're advertising your Kickstarter, people have a short memory. So they have a really hard time if, like, 2 months out or 3 months out, you're like, hey, my Kickstarter is coming in November, put it on your calendar, things like that. So, like, in the past, I've mostly just I've waited about 2 weeks before my campaign launches to start reaching out to people to say, hey, we're coming out with something in 2 weeks, put that in your calendar, because that's just an easier time period for people to start remembering. But with the pre-launch page, it's really easy to say, hey, click this link, and then it will send you a reminder, so I don't have to. And that's an actionable thing. I always think that you want to give people actionable items that are easy for them to do. And Kickstarter has done that, because they've given people, click this link, and then we'll send you an email when the project goes live. Right. So I was able to sort of do that about a month ahead of time and really start building up a following for that. We ended up having I think roughly 450 people on the pre-launch page. Yeah. And then our first day, and by first day, I mean the first 12 hours, because that's kind of how I measure the first day based on KickTrack and things, which has a cutoff of 12 a.m. Eastern time. So I launched at 9 a.m. and by LA time, and by 9 p.m., 12 hours later, we had 507 backers, I think, on the first day, which was insane. And I think insane. A lot of that had to, I know. Tell me about it. It was like, it was insane. And I'm very grateful. But I think so much of that was,
I didn't even, just to piggyback on that, and this is one of the things that Kickstarter really does for you, and building up your asset on Kickstarter is, I didn't even, I wasn't even working in the morning, but when I logged into my computer on Gmail, my inbox was all filled up with other creators and other people that I follow on Kickstarter that already backed GLARIEN. So I'm like, oh, Charlie's back. He's doing it.
Well, and I'm really grateful to that. And I think this is the other thing, the biggest thing that I can put out to people is be part of that Kickstarter community.
Yeah.
Because the Kickstarter community looks out for each other. And I'm at the point now where I don't have to do too much promotion on my campaigns, because I have other people helping me promote it. And I always think, like, if someone else is saying, go back Tyler's campaign, go back Rob's campaign, go back Clay's campaign, whatever, that has so much more weight than me saying, go back my campaign. Absolutely. And so it's like, to me, that's the most rewarding thing when I've launched a campaign, the last couple, is to see Twitter blow up from other creators who I love, who I respect, telling people to go check out my work. And I think like that's because I've really invested in the community. And I even put, when you're figuring out your funding and your budgeting, I put a line item in my Kickstarter budgets to make sure I'm backing other projects. And so I put that as part of my costs and expenses when I'm figuring out a project, because I want to be backing a lot of other people, getting to know other creators during the period when I'm on live, and hopefully being able to throw them some support, because I have been embraced by the Kickstarter community. I want to give back where I can. And, and I do. And I think that's one of the reasons why people have supported and continue to support my campaigns, because I support them. So I think that's, whatever your skill set is, that's something actionable that you as a creator coming to Kickstarter can do, is you can support other people. It doesn't have to be a print version. It doesn't even have to be, like a catch-up tier. Start supporting, backing, get to know the other creators, retweet them, share their books on Facebook, and they'll do the same for you, because it's a community that supports each other.
Yeah. And, that's one of my little dead zone tips or hacks for creators that feel like they're stuck, they're not moving. It's like, go back 3 or 4 campaigns and tweet and share on Facebook, and then go for a walk. I bet you'll come back and you'll find you've gotten a couple backers. Not that it will be the people that you just backed. It's just there's this weird, what goes around comes around, universal reciprocity thing that you attract what you put out and what you give out, and it works on Kickstarter, and it's something that is at least something that you can do, because end of the day, like one of the things that's out of our control is making people back, and it's one of those things that I'm sure you felt this, like even if you've done it before, the idea that 500 people come out within the first 12 hours to support this thing, like it feels magic. It feels a little bit like it's not right. But the truth is, on the other end of every single one of those backers is a real live human being that did not have a gun against his or her head, that made the decision to back you. And you can only do so much, but they have to make that decision. And so when you sort of let go of this having to control everything, it actually makes you just take a deep breath, go out there and promote the thing passionately.
Right. And I'm very humbled by seeing all the people who've come out to support it. But at the same time, I don't think that the campaign doesn't deserve it. I spend a lot of time, like even like the project image. GLARIEN's got the big buzzer over her face right there, but it's Connor did the project image, and we had a lot of discussion over what should that image be. And it's the kind of thing, where the focus is on her eyes and everything, that makes you look, and it plays well small. I think creators just need to take a look at every single piece of their campaign and analyze what's going to work, what's not going to work. And that's what I do. I put a lot of work into figuring out the parameters of what's going to work for this specific campaign on Kickstarter. It's doing well.
So one thing I want to get back to, because I know this is something that you sort of been thinking about as you've been trying to figure out the collector's market, but also trying to just figure out, hey, what's going to sell, what's going to work, and how do you make sure that you can justify the expense of getting variant covers, because having variants isn't as simple as, well, I'll just make 5 covers and toss 5 covers out there. And so I'm curious, like, what have you been thinking in terms of, you approach an artist and they tell you their rate, and figuring out, like, okay, well, is that a no-brainer, or is that an investment that I'm going to make a return on? Like, how are you going about making those decisions?
Well, I think some of it is you have to look at the following of the artist, where their covers are selling, and are they selling? And, you can look at other campaigns that have a lot of variant covers and see what people are backing. Like that's one thing that you can do. You can look in the retail market and see, where these people, how their covers are selling. Like I just did one of the variant covers I did for the GLARIEN one shot was from Carla Cohen. That's not on the part of the Kickstarter campaign. This was released through Scout. that was a really expensive cover. Her rate is really high. And I thought to myself, I'll try this. I'll see whether it works. And the return on that was 5 to 6 times what I spent on the cover in the direct market, which is kind of crazy. But,
Right.
like that's a cover that people are buying. With these covers, I wanted to do 2 different things. I wanted, I had Connor do one because Connor is my artist on White Ash, so I'm pulling people over. But I also wanted women drawing GLARIEN. And so as the people I knew, the people who I thought had, some of a fan, like Rosie Kempe did Spider-Gwen. So, she has, her own followers. Liana Kangas is now doing a Star Wars story. She has her own, she's like these people. I know a lot of them socially on Twitter and from other places. And if they have a following, if they have passionate people who love their work and you love their work, that's something that you want. You want to love the artists that you're working with, but you also want to make sure that there are other people who love their work. And will they bring you 10 to 15 to 20 backers? And then do that cost analysis based on their cover and the price that you're doing it. Yeah. Or does it just make you happy? Like sometimes I'll commission a cover because I love it. I want that cover and I don't care if it sells too much. And again, full disclosure, having had these successful campaigns, I have the latitude to spend a little bit more money on a cover and to take some risks here and there, and reach out to people. And, if that cover price is high, I can sort of say, let's give it a shot because right. I have, the fan base and people who are buying things. So I think everyone needs to make that choice for themselves. But I think you should contact an artist you love, but one that has a following, because if no one knows who they are, it's not going to do you any good unless it's just the most beautiful cover ever, and then people will buy it.
Yeah. Good tips there and good approach. And again, that is one of the benefits of having some success. And we talked, I think we talked a little bit about this on Twitter, is that, in some cases you need money to make money. And, yeah. But you're also an example of someone that's building this from the ground up, and yeah. you didn't start at a $35,000 launch with 1,000 backers.
No, I started and then just like 12,000 on 327 backers.
Yeah.
And it's the campaigns have gotten bigger going forward and given me that latitude to take some risks.
Well, and you're one of the examples that I often cite of the power of launch serialization and the power of and the commitment to stick with one series. I look back, if I could go back and give myself advice, it would have been to stick with the serialization, focus on, one property and building that up over a series of launches. I think when I first got into Kickstarter, like the idea even of serializing every issue kind of was a head scratcher, or it wasn't really out there. And so, I think that if I were, and I know we were also sort of, the idea is, all right, well, maybe the first issue we launch on Kickstarter, but then use the direct market for everything else, when in the reality, subsequent issues in the direct market only go down in most cases, or sometimes they get a rebound and take off. But then you're also, the direct market is you're selling the lowest priced product at 60% off. It becomes a challenge if that's your primary driver. And so, if I could go back and do it again, it would be closer to the White Ash model, unless I was working with a publisher that could move the kind of numbers that you would need to make these things sustainable.
And there's very few publishers at this point who are doing that, and by almost none. I think it's also branding. Not a lot, people might not know my name, but a lot of people on Kickstarter know White Ash. Yeah. And I think that's the kind of thing where you have, when you have 6 or 7 projects under the same title, you might not back the first one or the second one. And thank you for that. Yeah. The artists I work with are incredible. And I think when you're on Kickstarter, you start to see some of the same projects because they're there every couple of months, and they just get to, people get to know that brand. And if they don't check out your first campaign or your second campaign, at some point they're going to click, because it's, they keep seeing that. So if people are backing it, it must be good. Or, what am I missing out on?
That was the same phenomenon, I think, that a lot of creators found at conventions. It's like the first time you go to a convention, maybe you don't do so well. You show up again the next time, and the next time. There's such turnover in terms of new faces coming in, and people that try it and don't get the result that they wanted the first time out, so they don't come back, that it's those faces that keep coming back, whether it's at a convention or on Kickstarter, those series that have legs and that always seem to fund, and in some cases, in a lot of cases, pick up steam with each successive launch, that it's like, okay, let me see what this is all about, and they've got to jump in. So I just think, in terms of all the platforms, of all the aspirational places where I've created this thing, and now what's my next move? For me, the advice I always give is it's Kickstarter. Establish a beachhead on Kickstarter, because let's be honest, like having a fan base, having not just a fan base though. Like, so many people are like, well, I got 10,000 clicks on this post, or I got a dozen likes on, hundreds of likes on my Instagram, or followers. Like, well, okay, what's your customer base look like? What's your customer list look like? And you can establish that on Kickstarter, and that makes other things like the direct market or conventions or expanding in other areas so much easier when you do have that base from Kickstarter. So it's been just a pleasure to watch you provide a template that I know a lot of creators have been paying attention to and looking at and being inspired by, Charlie. So appreciate you coming back and doing some more inspiration and showing us how it's done.
And people, if they have questions, they can always reach out to me. Like I said before, I think we need to be part of a community together. So I'm always happy to try to help other creators on Kickstarter.
Absolutely. And so before we wrap up this, I did want to give you just a little space to check in and see, as co-publisher over at Scout, any big announcements, any things you're excited about over there. I saw that Scout just got a non-exclusive distribution deal with the same distributor that's also putting out DC Comics. So I don't know, any Scout news you want to hit us up with. And I will also put out, just one sec, to anyone watching live, if there are specific questions that you have for Charlie and you want to get them in, feel free to shoot them in the comments.
I would say, so in terms of Scout, it's sort of the same philosophy that I have on Kickstarter. Kickstarter can fund your book, and then you can put it into the direct market with your cost covered. And so, these things become additional sources of revenue. The deal we just announced with Lunar Distribution is going to be great. But it's basically giving retailers another way they can get our books. They can either get them through Diamond or they can get them through Lunar. I think when DC did it, a lot of retailers were upset because no longer could they get them through Diamond. They could only get them through this competitor. And so it was basically creating yet another monopoly. And so we're always looking for ways at Scout, and me personally, to find more ways to bring my books to people. So, again, having the relationship I have now with Scout, when I do something on Kickstarter, in my mind, I'm looking, how can I eventually bring this to the direct market in a way that's different than what I put out on Kickstarter? So like with White Ash, which has come out in the direct market, and Kickstarter, it was 4 oversized issues. I turned that into a 6-issue mini-series that came out through Scout with a couple of additional pages. So each version was its own first printing that was unique to that market. There's a lot of overlap, but I'm just trying to find ways to put the stories that I tell out into as many channels as possible. And I think, the world keeps changing. We all need to keep diversifying how we're reaching people, how we're going about selling products and telling stories.
Absolutely. And if if we didn't learn how to pivot and be resilient over the past year and a half, then we're probably never gonna learn it, because we definitely had that opportunity. It was very weird for me to prepping for my taxes this past year to see my conventions line item at 0 for 2020 after having done conventions and sold, had that be at least a significant line item on my income revenue sheet to zero that out. But thankfully, other opportunities have been able to make up for that, and Kickstarter is definitely one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a little while again before we're at conventions, or at least the larger conventions. I mean, you just saw San Diego just canceled.
I was having a chat with some guys about the prospects of New York Comic Con, and are they still going to be giving vaccines in October at Javits Center? I don't know.
So we'll see. But I think that's also important for creators to keep trying to figure out what venues they can sell, how because there's been a lot of people who have come to Kickstarter, and I think a lot of people are now taking it more seriously than they were a year ago, pre-pandemic. So, I mean, I think, that means more competition. It means you have to work a little harder to stand out, but there's also more backers there too.
Yeah. Question came in, and I guess I'll ask your take on this. From Mask of X Comics asks, do you have anything to say about Etsy as a marketplace for your comics? Any thoughts on that, Charlie?
My first thought is it's probably not the best market for comics, because I've never thought of it as a market for comics. And I think people tend to go to the places that they think of as markets for their comics to get their comics. So, like for me, I would think of comic book shops. I would think of online, comic book stores. I would think of Kickstarter, maybe some people who are selling things from Patreon. But that's never even crossed my mind. So I don't think it's the best place. But if you have a platform that you can push people to your store on Etsy, it's not the worst idea.
Yeah. I'd say that for the kinds of comics that Charlie makes, the kind of comics that Comics Tribe makes, which tend to be, I'm not going to say mass produced, but they're definitely not handcrafted in terms of, when they're printed and staple bound and or produced or with spines and hardcovers. The kinds of stuff that we do tend not to fall into the brand of Etsy, which is but I do know Etsy does have sort of handmade zines and screen printed sort of prints and other things like that. So while there may be a market for art or in some cases sort of more artisanal comics, the kind of sort of full cover, highly polished, produced stuff that we tend to do might not be the most the biggest fit on a platform like Etsy. But what I usually say is, go find some examples and go look for some examples of creators that are doing it right on that platform and see what you can learn and what you can model from that. If you can't find any examples, then there's probably a good chance that that's not the best place for you to be in.
I mean, I don't think, that Etsy is going to be the place that brings you backers or brings you clients or customers. If you can push your fan base there to buy it through your store, that's I think that's where Kickstarter differs is I have my fan base that comes into Kickstarter, but Kickstarter also pushes me people who buy comics. I don't think Etsy is going to be pushing you a huge group of people that you didn't already have in your network.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right, Charlie, this has been awesome, man. I appreciate you taking the time to fill us in on all things White Ash and GLARIEN and Scout Comics and just everything that's going on with this latest launch. I'm really excited to see where this thing lands because it's taken off like a rocket ship, and I would encourage you to just keep beating the drum about it because you make tremendous books. The White Ash hardcover that I have in my collection from you is one of the most gorgeous books that I think I've gotten from Kickstarter. So keep making them, man, and I'll keep supporting them.
No, I appreciate that, and I always do like to say this. When I was first coming to the Kickstarter platform, it was one of your seminars that I took that kind of oriented me to what I was doing. And I don't think without that seminar, I would have had anywhere near the success that I've had subsequently, because I don't think the first launch would have been as successful. So I always push people towards your podcast. I think it's a great source of information, and I am always thrilled to be here on your show.
I appreciate that, Charlie, and it's been a pleasure. So many creators from all around the world that are doing this thing through that, and so as we said, these things have a way of snowballing, and what goes around comes around, and so it's a pleasure to be once again having you on the podcast and sharing your insights and your approach to Kickstarter, because I think it's refreshing, and I think it shows a lot of what's possible for creators out there that have big ideas and want to see them grow and prosper. So thanks once again.
Anytime.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. And on behalf of Charlie and myself, we all can't wait to see what you all launch next. Take care.